A routine courtroom hearing takes an unexpected turn when a judge mocks a black woman standing before him. But when she reaches into her pocket and pulls out something that changes everything, the entire courtroom freezes. What happens next will leave everyone speechless. Let us know in the comment section below. Have you ever witnessed someone underestimate the wrong person? Denise Parker took a slow, measured breath as she stepped into the courthouse, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. She wasn't nervous, far from it, but she was irritated. The justice system was supposed to serve the people, and yet time and time again, she had seen it serve only those in power. Today wasn't about winning or losing for her. It was about making a statement. The air inside the courtroom was thick with the murmur of conversations. Lawyers shuffled papers, clerks tapped away at keyboards, and a few defendants sat hunched over, awaiting their turn before the judge. The moment Denise entered, heads turned, some subtle, others blatant. A black woman, dressed sharply in a navy blue suit, holding herself with the kind of confidence that made people uncomfortable. She had dealt with it her entire life. The quiet disbelief, the questioning stares. She walked to her assigned seat at the defendant's table and placed her file down with deliberate care. Her opponent, an arrogant-looking white attorney in an expensive charcoal suit, smirked as he leaned toward her. "First time here, huh?" he said, his voice condescending, dripping with amusement. Denise didn't flinch. "You talk too much," she said flatly, adjusting her cufflinks. The lawyer's smirk faltered for a second before he chuckled and leaned back in his chair. "All right, let's see if that attitude holds up when the judge rules against you." Denise knew exactly who she was up against. Judge Franklin Ulrich, a man known for his dismissive attitude toward women, especially black women, and his fondness for issuing rulings with a smirk. He was well-connected, influential, and had a history of favoring the rich and powerful. The door to the judge's chamber opened and the bailiff called out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Franklin Ulrich." Everyone stood as the judge strolled in, his robe billowing slightly as he took his seat behind the towering desk. He barely glanced at Denise before he focused on the opposing attorney. That was expected. "Let's make this quick," Ulrich said, already sounding bored as he shuffled through some papers. "Ms. Parker, you're here challenging the ruling on Case 482J, he sighed, glancing at the clock on the wall. "You're aware this is a complete waste of time, correct?" Denise remained calm. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I believe the original ruling was based on incomplete evidence and a misinterpretation of the law." Judge Ulrich laughed under his breath, a low, dismissive chuckle. The sound irritated Denise more than anything else. She had spent years watching men like him get away with arrogance, treating the courtroom like their personal stage. He thrived on moments like this, when he could belittle someone in front of an audience, play the role of the untouchable ruler. "Miss Parker," he drawled, resting his chin on his palm. "I admire your persistence, but let's be realistic here. I've been on the bench longer than you've probably been practicing law." Denise tilted her head slightly. "You'd be surprised." The judge smirked again, amused by his own power. "I see a lot of people come through this courtroom who think they can argue their way to a different ruling. Most of them are wrong. You, Miss Parker, are no exception." The audience chuckled, feeding into his arrogance. The opposing lawyer grinned, already feeling victorious. Denise remained still, her face unreadable. She could feel the weight of the room pressing against her, the silent expectation that she would crumble, that she would falter beneath the judge's condescension. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her voice steady. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I am fully aware of how long you've been on the bench, and I'm also aware of your reputation." A flicker of irritation crossed Ulrich's face. "My reputation?" "Yes," Denise said smoothly. "You have a certain habit of underestimating people like me." The murmurs in the courtroom grew slightly louder. The judge's smirk twitched, the first sign of discomfort. Parker," he said, forcing a chuckle. "I'd advise you to watch your tone." Denise finally allowed a small smile to touch her lips. "That's funny," she mused, "because I was about to say the same thing to you." A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from amusement to controlled irritation. "This is a court of law, not a debate club," he snapped. "Your motion is denied. Court is adjourned." He lifted the gavel to strike it down. Denise moved faster. Before the gavel could hit the desk, she reached into her pocket and calmly placed something on the table in front of her. The sound of metal hitting the wood rang out loud and clear. A badge. Not just any badge. A United States Secret Service badge. The courtroom fell into dead silence. The judge's hand, mid-manner, froze. His face paled slightly as his eyes locked onto the badge, and for the first time that day he didn't have a witty remark. Denise watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. "Are you?" the opposing lawyer stammered. Denise calmly reached for her badge and flipped it open, revealing her full credentials. "Denise Parker, United States Secret Service." The judge's fingers twitched slightly. His smirk was gone. The energy in the room shifted completely. People whispered among themselves, exchanging confused glances. Denise let the moment stretch, just long enough to make sure everyone in the courtroom understood what was happening. Then she leaned forward, locking eyes with the judge. "Now," she said, her voice steady, "would you like to rethink your decision, Your Honor?" The judge swallowed hard. For the first time in his courtroom, he wasn't the one in control. Judge Franklin Alridge sat motionless, his knuckles tightening around the gavel. The once smug amusement in his eyes had been replaced with a flicker of something Denise recognized all too well. Fear. The courtroom had been his domain, his playground of power, where he could twist the scales of justice with a smirk. But now, it wasn't just another routine hearing. It wasn't just another black woman standing before him, pleading her case. No, this was something else entirely. Denise could see it in his face, the rapid calculations, the silent panic. He was trying to figure out just how much trouble he was in. The opposing attorney, who had been grinning like a cat moments earlier, now looked like he wanted to shrink into his suit. The audience was stunned into silence, all eyes darting between the judge and the woman who had just flipped the entire power dynamic on its head. Denise didn't move. She didn't need to. The weight of her authority, the sheer reality of her badge sitting on the desk between them, did all the talking for her. The judge's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. His hand twitched, as if itching to bring the gavel down to regain some sense of control. But he knew better now. "Secret Service?" he finally said, his voice quieter than before. "That's correct," Denise replied, her tone measured. His gaze flickered down to the badge again, then back up at her. She could almost hear the gears grinding in his head. "You should have disclosed that information before entering my courtroom," he said, forcing his voice into a tight semblance of authority. Denise arched her brow. "I didn't realize I was required to disclose my credentials when petitioning for a fair trial." "Or does the law only apply to certain people in your courtroom, Your Honor?" A murmur swept through the gallery. Some smirks flickered among the audience. The same people who had been laughing at Denise just moments ago now looked at her with wide eyes, as if seeing her for the first time. The judge clenched his jaw. His hand twitched again. The gavel. He wanted to use it, to slam it down and shut this all down, but he knew that doing so now would only make things worse for him. Denise leaned forward just enough for only him to hear. "You're sweating, Your Honor." It was subtle, but she saw it. The bead of sweat forming near his temple, the way his fingers gripped the desk a little too hard. He was trying to figure out what she knew. Denise had done her homework before walking into this courtroom. She had spent the last week digging into every ruling, every case Franklin Ulrich had presided over. She had read the complaints, most of which had conveniently disappeared before ever reaching a review board. He thought he was untouchable. Until now. "Ms. Parker," he said, his voice sharp but lacking the bite it had earlier. "What exactly is the meaning of this? What game are you playing here?" Denise tilted her head. "A game?" She gestured to her badge. "I take my position very seriously, Your Honor, as I'm sure you do." She let the weight of her words settle. The judge pressed his lips into a thin line, clearly realizing she wasn't going to back down. Denise glanced at the opposing counsel, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. "Would you like to continue your argument, Mr. Cartwright?" she asked casually. "Or would you rather sit this one out?" Cartwright hesitated, looking between Denise and the judge. He wasn't stupid. He could sense the shift in power, the way the courtroom no longer felt like the judge's playground. He cleared his throat. "I think, perhaps, Your Honor, we should reconvene at a later—" "We'll proceed," the judge interrupted, his voice tense. His pride was still clawing to take back control. Denise smiled. Good. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a stack of neatly printed documents, placing them on the desk. "Because I'd hate to think this courtroom operates under any biases." The word biases made the judge's nostrils flare slightly. Denise continued, her voice calm but firm. "This case, Your Honor, is more than just a simple dispute. It's about the integrity of this court. It's about ensuring that justice is not only served but seen as fair. Now, I'm sure you would agree that any appearance of partiality," she emphasized the word with a slight smile, "would undermine the public's trust in the legal system." The judge stared at her, unmoving. Denise casually flipped through her documents. "Let's start with the financial records." Ulrich blinked. "What?" Denise slid a single sheet across the desk toward him. "These are public records, of course. They show a rather interesting pattern of campaign contributions, all linked to certain individuals whose cases have, miraculously, gone in their favor under your rulings." A hush fell over the room. The judge's face darkened. "I hope you're not insinuating." "I don't insinuate," Denise interrupted smoothly. "I deal in facts." She tapped the paper. "These names ring a bell, Your Honor?" The judge hesitated just a second too long. Denise continued flipping through the stack. "And here, we have a complaint filed by a former clerk, the details of which were unfortunately buried before any formal review could be conducted. But I'm sure that's just a coincidence." The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. The audience barely dared to breathe. Denise finally looked up. "Would you like me to keep going?" The judge's hands were now completely still. He wasn't gripping the desk anymore. He wasn't smirking. He was sweating. Denise leaned back slightly, exuding the kind of confidence that made men like him squirm. "I'll be filing a formal report with the appropriate authorities," she continued. "It's important, after all, that we hold our institutions accountable. Wouldn't you agree?" The judge opened his mouth and closed it. He was trapped. Denise stood. She gathered her files, picked up her badge, and slid it back into her pocket. Then, with the same measured composure she had walked in with, she turned to leave. She had made her point. But before she stepped out, she paused and looked back at the judge one final time. "Have a nice day, Your Honor." And with that, she walked out, leaving the entire courtroom and Judge Franklin Ulrich in complete silence. Denise Parker didn't look back as she exited the courtroom, but she didn't need to. She could feel the weight of the moment hanging thick in the air behind her. The silence she left in her wake was deafening. Judge Franklin Ulrich, the man who had ruled over this courtroom with smug indifference for years, had finally been forced to sit in the hot seat, and he knew it. She stepped into the hallway, her heels clicking against the marble as she walked with purpose. This wasn't just about her case anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about exposing the corruption that had been allowed to fester in the very institutions meant to uphold justice. The courtroom doors swung open behind her, and a rush of voices spilled into the hallway. People were murmuring, whispering, sharing stunned glances as they poured out of the gallery. Some were in shock, others in awe. A few, lawyers, clerks, and those who had clearly been on the wrong side of Aldridge's rulings, wore the faintest traces of satisfaction. Denise barely made it a few steps before she heard hurried footsteps behind her. Parker. She didn't stop walking. What do you want, Cartwright? The opposing lawyer, Thomas Cartwright, was practically tripping over himself to catch up to her. Gone was the arrogant smirk he had worn at the start of the hearing. Now he looked like a man trying to salvage whatever he could from a sinking ship. Look, he said, breathless. I just want to say, I didn't know. I had no idea about the things you brought up in there. Denise finally stopped, turning to face him with a level stare. Didn't you? His lips parted, his protest dying in his throat. Because the truth was, men like him always knew. They might not have known the details, the exact numbers, the paperwork that laid it all bare, but they knew something. They benefited from it. They laughed at it. And they never questioned it. Until someone like Denise Parker forced them to. Cartwright ran a hand through his hair. This is going to be a mess. It already was a mess, Denise corrected. You all just got comfortable living in it. His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked down, embarrassed, before mumbling, You're right. Denise didn't wait for anything else. She turned and continued walking down the hallway, leaving him to figure out what kind of man he really was. Meanwhile, back in the courtroom, Judge Aldridge sat frozen in his seat, staring at the documents Denise had left behind. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for them, scanning the names, the numbers, the undeniable proof that someone had been watching him. Not just watching, gathering, building a case. His mind raced. If she had these documents now, what else did she have? How deep did this go? The murmuring voices in the courtroom only made his skin prickle with paranoia. He could hear people whispering. The stenographer looked at him differently. The bailiff avoided his eyes. The clerk kept darting glances his way. The walls were closing in. For the first time in his career, Franklin Aldridge felt powerless in his own courtroom. And then his clerk stepped forward, his face unusually stiff. Sir, he said quietly, leaning in. There's someone from the State Bar Association in your office. They're requesting a private meeting. Aldridge's heart pounded. The Bar Association? Yes, sir. And? The clerk hesitated. And? An investigator from the DOJ. The words hit him like a freight train. He felt the blood drain from his face. No, not now. Not like this. Aldridge looked around the room as if searching for an escape route. But there wasn't one. This was the moment he had spent years avoiding, the moment where all the things he had swept under the rug, all the favors he had granted to powerful friends, all the rulings he had twisted in his own interests, had finally come crashing down. And it was all because of her. That damn woman. Denise Parker had walked into his courtroom like a storm, and she had left it in ruins. Denise stepped outside the courthouse, breathing in the crisp afternoon air. The sky was bright, the city buzzing with life, but she knew things were different now. There was no going back. She pulled out her phone and made a call. It's done, she said simply. A pause. Then a voice on the other end. How bad was it? Denise exhaled, glancing back at the courthouse doors. Bad enough. The voice hummed in approval. Good. Denise hung up. She had done her part. Judge Franklin Aldridge would face the consequences. The DOJ would do their job. The Bar Association would do theirs. The legal system might not have been perfect, but today, at least, it had been forced to answer to someone. and Denise Parker had made sure of it. She turned, adjusted her blazer, and walked away, knowing that the world she had just left behind would never be the same again.